Hello, my name is Brianne Martin. I'm part of Dr. Cross's Introduction to Philosophy class, and this is my Socratic evaluation assignment. So for part one, let's get started. Lawyers and advertisers are sophists. For sophists to become expert debaters and advertisers, they have to learn how to use emotional appeals, as well as manipulate physical appearance and clever language to sell their particular points of view. The modern meaning of sophistry is used to describe overly subtle, superficially plausible, but ultimately fallacious reasoning. On the topic of lawyers and advertisers, they have to sell their story or product even if it means resorting to manipulation. Some lawyers will lie in court to avoid sanctions or to protect their client or to win a case. Some lawyers will even sign their clients to lie under oath. As for advertisers, they will stretch the truth for their product because they understand what looks good will grab people's attention. Because of advertisements' inherent reflexivity, they will make unsubstantiated claims just to raise revenue, and they are legally allowed to most of the time. Both lawyers and advertisers will regularly use ethos, pathos, and logos, and even fallacies to help drive the audience to feel for their movement. Sophists are given a bad rap for having ulterior motives and win-at-all-cost attitudes. Because they manipulate words and emotions to persuade people to see their point as the right one, they are seen as negative figures. While what they're doing may not be right, we should still recognize them for their skill of communication. Manipulation is an art, and they know exactly what to do. Now, sophistry isn't always wrong, just like people in power, like politicians or school boards, they have a purpose, and sometimes they can use their skills and influences for good. Manipulation doesn't always have to be a bad thing. An example of this could be persuading someone to take a new life-saving medication, or exaggerating something so someone doesn't end up taking the blame. At the end of the day, we are all inherently manipulative. It is a trait we all have. Politicians are most definitely sophists. Technically, everyone can be considered a sophist because we all lie or exaggerate for our own benefit. However, whatever we do has a consequence, and for people who are constantly in the spotlight, like a politician, they can be met with brutal repercussions for even the smallest thing. And now we're moving on to part two. Socrates lived as an example of his teachings, emphasizing beauty has nothing to do with knowledge or wisdom, and our decisions are made with good intentions. Socrates is one of the most influential philosophers of today, bringing a wave of humanism and nihilism into the limelight. While I do think it is possible to separate someone from their philosophy, I also strongly believe there will be a consequence to it. Similar to how I said earlier, politicians can use sophist methods and their actions will still have an effect. Whether that be someone identifies their practice and grows to hate them for it, or they can separate the man from the work. An example of this could be religion. Many pastors or priests may be pedophiles or something along those lines, but would you stop following someone, following a religion just because the high priest violated his vows? Well, some people would. For others, they will separate the man from the philosophy. Some people believe Socrates was a good father for his teachings and purpose. He put in hard work to help sculpt the world and ideas his children would grow into, and sacrificed his life and meaning for it. However, I cannot stand behind this defense, personally. As someone who has had a father figure like this, I'm rather against it because I understand how detrimental their decisions can be on family. It doesn't work in real life because even if they are doing good work, they're still neglecting their family where most of their work and time should be focused. Now, while I say that, there are some cases that it is acceptable. For example, my mom is a psychotherapist and she specializes in domestic violence and abuse. And a lot of her clients are in poverty, or they just don't have the means or capability to pay her full price. And she understands that, and she can negotiate prices with them. However, we're lucky enough to be able to depend on my father to actually make a living. Socrates thought it was important to teach, but not for money, because it altered the purpose of teaching. Rather than teaching for the genuine good or growth of themselves and the students, their motive was money, and money is a material thing. Socrates thought it was very important not to teach for money because he believed the most important order of business was to engage the other person. And the Socratic method has fed into this. In the end, it all comes down to someone's purpose, and if you are teaching, preaching, or healing with money as your end goal rather than engaging with your client and growing, then the impact you leave is very shallow. However, that doesn't mean that this kind of work should go unrewarded. People still need to make a living, and a form of praise when doing something good is a great incentive for them to continue teaching. If it were discovered that Socrates secretly violated many of his teachings, it wouldn't affect my attitude towards his philosophy, but rather towards him as a person. Priests will cuss or act in accordance with the 7 deadly sins, and their actions will not inherently affect their religion, but our views on them as a person. And this goes for anyone in a position of power. Similarly with Socrates, if he did something that violated his teachings, it would only make him perverse and not the philosophy itself, assuming that he doesn't change his philosophy in order for his actions to be excused. Now, the more personal relevance a philosopher has, the better philosophy he can create. However, it is tentative because often we live by the phrase, do as I say, not what I do. For example, I have been lucky to listen to my mom counsel, and she has given me great advice that I can turn it around and offer it to my friends. However, I can advise them against something that I do because I know it's not good for me, and I wouldn't want that for them, and they would do the same for me in certain cases. At the end of the day, it is all relative. Socrates used his physical appearance as an example that beauty has nothing to do with virtue or wisdom. His approach was effective because he is one of the most renowned philosophers of today. Using our definition of a sophist that I mentioned earlier, Socrates denied being a sophist, actually. The reason Socrates disagreed with the sophists was that he thought people should base their decision on what they perceive to be good within themselves, whereas the sophists thought the opposite. Because wisdom was more than the truth of sophist values, Socrates believed that true enlightenment was necessary. On the other hand, in case he could have been a sophist, is because his philosophy was subtle with a Socratic irony and superficially plausible as with any philosophy. The stronger case would be that Socrates is not a sophist. However, at the end of the day, we are all manipulative in our own ways, so inherently it could go either way. Now, in the case of do any individuals or groups fulfill a Socratic function in today's society? Yes. The US government used to operate in a Socratic function. However, it hasn't operated like that in the last 40 years. Now, in certain cases, so for my very first high school I attended was Midland Classical Academy. And Midland Classical was very Socratic method based. Now, for middle school, you had a participation grade. And in middle school, it would take up 20% of your overall average grade. And whenever you hit high school, it would take up 30% of your overall average. And so you had no choice but to participate. You had to talk in class, or you'd end up failing the class. Now, the way MCA was set up, you would have a class of maybe 15 people maximum, and you'd go in class and your tables would be set up in a circle. So everyone's looking at each other. There's no groups here and groups there. Everyone's together and everyone's communicating together. We could talk one-on-one to each other rather than it being grueling sit and take notes without speaking. Instead of just without speaking, most of the time, actually all the time, the teachers would ask questions to draw out the answers from us, so we can figure out the answer gradually on our own. This could be for English, this could be for a speech class, this could be for even math. In math, actually, a lot of the time the teacher would show an example or two, and while they would show the example, they would be asking questions so they can draw the answer out of us. And other times, they would bring up students to the board so the students could show their understanding. That way, they could either help students in the class that were struggling, because the teacher would critique them as they go. Or if they were struggling, they could get help from the classmates. And so that has been my Socratic evaluation assignment. My works consulted are can manipulation be used in a positive way? The 10 biggest lies ever told in advertising, and 6 reasons why some lawyers lie in court. Thank you for listening.